This time, on Only in America, with Friday's DACA deadline looming, where's the love promised by President Trump?
I feel having the Democrats in with us is absolutely vital because this should be a bipartisan bill. This should be a bill of love. Truly, it should be a bill of love, and we can do that.
And on the ground, how dreamers are coping with the highly charged debate about their lives.
Yesterday I was at Potbelly's, and the woman that is making our sandwich started talking to us and saying, do you think something's going to be resolved? She's Salvadorian, TPS, and she starts crying. And she says, I just really want to be able to see my son graduate from high school. Yeah. Right? That woman making my sandwich is doing that for her child. And has done all these sacrifices of coming to an unknown country where she doesn't know the language, she doesn't know the system of how things work, for her child.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Ali Noorani with Only in America. The big question: can I make it through the third week of 2018 without having to wash my mouth out with soap when discussing language allegedly used by the president? Certainly hope so, because there was a lot of soap in my mouth last week. For kicks, I went back to something I wrote about this time last year. Quote, Trump has conflated immigrants and refugees to create a narrative that pits millions of Americans against the other. Well, their narrative is set, and now the policy implications are becoming clear. Lisa Mascaro of the LA Times wrote last Friday, Trump has already put the country on track to remove 1 million immigrants over the next 2 years. And now the president started this week, week 3 of 2018, with a tweet that read, DACA is probably dead because the Democrats don't really want it. Well, with all due respect, Mr. President, can't say I agree. First of all, if Democrats play politics with the issue, their Latino base will have their heads. In fact, Democrats are putting things on the table now that their base is not happy about. Second, if Congress fails to find a solution, the public will see a Trump administration that is deporting 800,000 dreamers. These stories will race across America, and just as the Joe Arpaio for Senate campaign takes shape and DHS ramps up interior enforcement, the deportations will come to define the GOP. President Trump will not be able to tweet his way out of stories of young people his administration is deporting. But despite all this, and since I just spent the weekend at a friend's wedding in Cancun, I have a few reasons to be optimistic. First of all, watch the negotiations by the, quote, 2 group of Representatives McCarthy and Hoyer and Senators Cornyn and Durbin. This bipartisan configuration has a chance of success as long as extremists such as Senators Cotton and Perdue and Stephen Miller are just kept out of the room. Second reason to be optimistic. For people like Republican Representative Mia Love of Utah, whose family came from Haiti. She put it well on CNN over the weekend when she said, let's keep moving toward a solution. We can't let distractions get in the way. I hope more Republicans follow the lead of Congresswoman Love in the days ahead. Third, as featured in Sunday's Politico Playbook, the Evangelical Immigration Table released a letter urging members to work together towards a legislative solution for Dreamers. The leadership of the table, in my estimation, leads a Southern Baptist minister from Alabama such as Alan Cross to tell the Wall Street Journal over the weekend that his faith pushed him in a direction of speaking on behalf of the undocumented. And a final reason to be optimistic. After last week's shocker of a court decision to require USCIS to take DACA renewal applications, they actually began to do so on Friday. So that's a pretty good list of reasons to be optimistic. Let's look ahead to this week. This coming Friday is when the current continuing resolution is set to expire. Initially, we were hoping there would be a bipartisan agreement on spending caps and DACA in order to keep the government funded. The current political environment is clearly making that pretty difficult, which means we may see the House pass a cleanish continuing resolution that gets the minimum number of Democratic votes in the Senate, like they did just before the holidays. But even this will be difficult as Senate Democrats are under tremendous pressure not to allow the budget to move ahead without a DACA deal. So a couple other things before we get to our interview. In a powerful op-ed regarding TPS, DACA, and the need for overall reform, Republican Governor Kasich of Ohio and former National Immigration Forum board member Jeb Bush Jr. vividly reminded us of the Elian Gonzalez case from years ago. In the context of immigration deportations, if no solutions are reached, they wrote, brace yourself for the possibility of seeing this kind of scene again. And Bret Stephens wrote in Saturday's New York Times, America is a nation of wholers. It is an improbable, yet wildly successful experiment in the transformation, by means of hope, opportunity, and ambition, of wholers into doers, makers, thinkers, and givers. Along these lines, I've come to believe Americans struggle with three questions when it comes to immigration. Are immigrants isolating or integrating? Are they threats or protectors? Are immigrants giving or taking? Culture, security, economy. How we make the case immigrants and refugees are contributing to the nation's prosperity, serving to protect the homeland, and ultimately becoming American is our path to getting the narrative, then the policy, back on track. I'm Ali Noorani. Coming up, the takeaway from a 4-month walk for dreamers from Miami to Washington, D.C.
We refuse to believe that the general public, the American people, were mean and hateful towards immigrants. We're like, they don't know, and they're scared of us.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
You're listening to Only in America. As a divided Congress fought over immigration, the wall, and racism last week, representatives of the 800,000 dreamers whose futures are under threat were back in Washington, D.C., continuing to put their case to lawmakers. One of their most prominent leaders is Gaby Pacheco, who was the very first undocumented Latina to testify in front of Congress back in 2013. Gaby's latest initiative, founded by the incredible Don Graham, is Dream.us, which provides scholarships to dreamers so they can attend college. In fact, last week, Dream.us received a $33 million grant from the Jeff and Mackenzie Bezos Foundation. I started my conversation with Gaby asking about her own personal journey.
So I came to the U.S. when I was 8 years old from Ecuador, and my family decided that they wanted to move to Miami. We had an aunt there that we used to come and visit, and when we would make our pit stop before going to Disney. We're actually one of those immigrant families that would make it to Disney. That's usually the line, right? We're going to go to Disney and then never make it there. But very similar to other immigrant families, my family came here seeking that opportunity to live a better life, to have stability in their economy or economics, and just safety. My dad remembers coming to the U.S. for business and seeing little kids walking to school. And he just thought that was so amazing how, these elementary school children can walk by themselves to their school. So he wanted that for his children. In 1993, there I was walking to school with my little brother from our home to our elementary school. And I really didn't understand what the big move was about. I just knew that we had moved from one house to another. And it wasn't until I looked at a globe that I saw that Ecuador was in the whole entire world, right? But it was just the equator was a line, and that I had moved really far away from my family and mostly my grandparents. And that's kind of when I started realizing that I was a little bit different and that things were different for our family. And when I was in middle school, my oldest sister wanted to go to college, and she came home crying saying they told me I didn't have the right kind of paper. So that was my first realization that we lacked some sort of documentation in the country. And what made me realize that I needed to do something about it myself in order for me not to fall into the same hole of not being able to go to college. And so I wanted to belong, and I wanted to prove to people in the country that I was deserving of that opportunity to go to school. And kind of that's where it all started. And when I was in high school, I started sharing with my teachers and counselors that I was undocumented. And at the time, that wasn't even a term. I just would tell people, I don't have papers. And silly of me, I thought that by doing that, the adults in the room would have the answer, and they would be able to
papers.
they would be able to tell me, this is what you need to do. Go to this office, and you can get your papers. But everybody was instead, they would tell me. My high school college counselor told me, Gabby, you just have to resign yourself to the idea that you're going to go to college, and you're just going to have to graduate from high school and go to work. And don't dare to apply anywhere because you're going to get yourself and your family in trouble. So that kind of negativity and her telling me, no, you're not going to be able to do that was very important and pivotal because I felt that I needed to prove her and everyone else wrong. And so I did. And after working really, really hard to be able to get accepted into college, I did, and I was accepted into Miami-Dade College. And I felt really guilty. I felt that it wasn't fair that my sisters, who also had done well in school, wanted to go to college and they couldn't, and that I had graduated with other undocumented people in my school and they weren't able to go to school, and I made it. So I made a promise to myself that I was going to fight for educational access for all. And that's kind of where it all started. I didn't know about immigration. I didn't know about the DREAM Act. This was 2003. And it was in January 2004 when a friend said, that thing you talk about, there's actually a legislation in Congress called the DREAM Act. You should look into it. So I went to the computer, Googled it, and kind of...
Was Google back then?
There was Google back then. And I just kind of became the subject expert in Miami around this issue and quickly around the country. I've traveled probably 40 plus states in the country since then. It was an anomaly to have a young undocumented person sharing their story. I remember in 2005, 2006, I was flown up to Washington, D.C. to speak at the National Press Club, and I told my story in front of like 40 reporters, and they were all in awe because I was willing to give my name, have my picture taken, and they were just like, do you know the trouble you're putting yourself in? And I didn't, but I also felt that I was like, come on, I'm one of millions. Like, are they really going to do something? But 2006, immigration did come after me. They knocked at my door looking for me, and unfortunately also found my family and put my parents and sisters in deportation proceeding. And that really shifted things in my mind, and it made me realize the bigger issue that we have on immigration. And so it just made me also a better advocate because I realized the massive stakes that there are for immigrant families in this country, but also how broken our immigration system is. So fast forward to 2009, I realized that having a new president promised that in the first 100 days he was going to do something, and we were seeing more and more people being detained, and specifically Dreamers being detained. I felt that we needed to do something more. And so when my friends Felipe and Isabel asked and said, do you want to walk with us to DC? I was like, yeah. And the funny thing why I said yeah so fast is because when my parents were detained, I was in such like a moment of shock, but also a moment of desperation of I need to do something bigger, and I need to do something to, bring attention to this issue. I thought I'm going to walk to DC. But then I said to myself, I can't do that. I'll do a bike ride. And then quickly I decided I couldn't do none of those things, or felt like I could, do a walk or bike. But fast forward to 2009, when I was asked, I think, mentally and not physically, but mentally ready for it. And so we embarked on that journey, which I think was really important for our movement, for young people across the country to realize the power that we have to use our voice, to use our bodies, and to use the common good of people to bring, the attention to this issue, and more than anything, to just humanize it. Right?
What I found about that moment, as I've looked back, is that it was a Trail of Dreams, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Trail of Dreams was one of the first efforts by the movement, by leadership within the movement, to move this from a political conversation or even a policy conversation to a conversation about culture. and really, put your story, your face on the ground in cities and towns, frankly, between DC and Miami. And I just always look back and say, okay, that's when, at least for me, I realized that this is not a political debate. This is a cultural debate. Yeah. And, people have these fears. And until we address those anxieties, until we kind of engage folks at that level and respect where they're coming from, the change is really, really hard to make.
Totally. And that was, one of the reasons why we did that, because we believed that, in Miami, we live kind of in a bubble, and you really have to drive up north to hit, the South. Yep. And we refused to believe that the general public, the American people, were mean and hateful towards immigrants. We just were like, they don't know, and they're scared of us, and they're scared of the unknown. And so we decided to go in and talk to people and walk through the South and use very similar tactics that we had seen being used by the civil rights movement and the farm worker movement, where we needed to push ourselves kind of to people, but in a gentle way, in the sense that we were not telling people that they were racist. We were not telling people, certain things. We were just saying to them, hear us out. Mm-hmm. Let's sit down, break bread, let's have a conversation and just hear our stories. Yeah. And that really was very impactful, because we saw a lot of people, from the morning that we met them to afternoon, just change their mind or be open to the idea of learning more about the issue.
Mm-hmm. So one of our kind of informal mottos here is that we want to meet people where they are, but just not leave them there. And you literally did that. So let's fast forward to kind of where we are right now. And before we even get to the debate on the Hill, a handful of years ago, Don Graham launched a program called Dream.us. Yeah. For me, meeting some of the students that have received scholarships, it has changed their lives in such fundamental ways. So describe a little bit the program, and pick one or two of your favorite stories of people that you've met through it.
So the Dream.us, I don't think people understand and know how important this program is, and the genius behind Don Graham understanding and knowing the power of education. This is a man that was a publisher of a newspaper. His family was very influential in DC and elsewhere. Actually, his uncle was the governor of Florida. So he just saw that there was something wrong in the fact that young people who want to go to college have huge motivation, are being told you can't get any loans, you can't get grants, and as a matter of fact, you have to pay international student fees, etc. So he sought out to talk to his friends and donors and other people, and bring on board myself and a veteran of the Gates Foundation to start a program that helped young people who want to go to college. And so far we've given scholarships to 3,000 people. We've raised $160 million, and the goal is to raise more. So hint, hint, go to the Dream.us if you are interested in this program or, feel it's a good program.
It's a great program. You should definitely go to Dream.us.
Thank you. But, it's helped people like Sadana. Sadana is a young woman from Georgia, and she had graduated from high school years ago, was working, somewhere in Georgia, helping her family out. When she got DACA, she kind of became the parent and would drive her parents around and would go to work and help pay for the bill and the mortgage. And somebody told her about this program. And they said, Sadana, it's your time. Brilliant young woman who wanted to go to college, but in Georgia, not only are you banned from going to the state universities, but you also have to pay the international student fee or the out-of-state tuition fee. And she took a leap of faith and applied and received a scholarship, and had a really hard decision to make. As a 26, 27-year-old woman, had been out of high school for a very long time, but her lifelong dream was to go to college and go to school to be a journalist. And she had to decide, do I leave my family behind? Mm-hmm. Do I, me as being the kind of breadwinner, but also the only one in the household that has a driver's license and, some sort of status. And there was some pressure by her parents to stay, she was their lifesaver, and she said, no, it's time for me to dream. And so now Sadana is in her last year of college. She has done phenomenal more than likely will be graduating as the valedictorian or something like that. I don't know how it's described in college, but this is such a bright woman that her dreams were deferred, but her dreams weren't deferred for long. And I know that we're going to see her doing really big things. She's already been doing really big things. And, like her, there's another student actually at Trinity Washington University that has 5 children. She was at the upper age cap of DACA, but she was able to get it. And her first day of school, it was her 15-year-old son that took her and showed her how to get around the bus to get to school. Mm-hmm. And what a great example that mom who works full-time, has 5 children, and is going to school full-time is giving to her kids, right? About perseverance, about, wanting to do something. And she's also about to be done. She'll be a teacher. She's going to school to be an early childhood teacher. And, her story is going to impact the Latino kids in her community when she goes, and says, look, anything is possible, your dreams. And so the dream that U.S. is really making the dreams of these young people possible. But at the heart of it, and this is where the genius part comes in, those young people's dreams are not just their dreams, right? We're talking about their parents, we're talking about their community. Mm-hmm. And, not to be cheesy, but economically, right? Like when we talk about economics and when we talk about the power of young people going to college, more than ever, we need more young people to be able to have the skill sets, to continue to move the country forward, to pay the higher taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're going to make more money, but more than anything to make us more competitive. And I think that that's the thing that we don't want to talk about it because we don't want to be seen as we're trying to be better than naturally, born U.S. citizens, but that's not what it is. It's just about these young people who feel they're American, grew up here, were in the same classrooms as those U.S.-born citizens, and will help us, all of us, the whole entire country, move forward and have a competitive edge in the world, right? In a globalized society that we live in now.
So talk a lot about family, and not just your family, but the scholarship recipients' families. And at least something that's been on my mind a lot these days is the power of family, and how I think a lot of the policy debate and a lot of the overarching understanding that Americans have of immigration is starting to dismiss the notion of family. Mm-hmm. Whether we're talking about temporary protected status or DREAM or anything, and it's just this kind of dismissal that immigrants are here to work. Yep. And their families don't count. Yeah. And I've been really struggling with how do we help people understand that an immigrant's family is just like anybody else's family. So I mean, in this moment, it feels like that's just a bigger and bigger part of this conversation.
It totally is. And unfortunately, the way we talk about immigrants is as if they're just goods. Mm-hmm. And immigrants come to do a certain job, and we talk about how we want immigrants to have certain skills, and we're going to put them in a point system. And so we start to fragment what an immigrant is and take out the essence of their humanity and take out their essence of being a human. And, if we were to all go around and ask, what's the most important thing in your life? Usually they say my wife, my children, my parents. And at the end of the day, that's no different for immigrants. And so for the young people, yesterday I was at Potbelly's, and the woman that is making our sandwich started talking to us and saying, do you think something's going to be resolved? She's Salvadorian, TPS, and she starts crying. And she says, I just really want to be able to see my son graduate from high school. Yeah. Right? That woman making my sandwich is doing that for her child, and has done all these sacrifices of coming to an unknown country where she doesn't know the language, she doesn't know the system of how things work, for her child. Yeah. My inspiration, my motivation, internally, when we talk about the American dream, I'm like, the American dream was embedded in me by my parents. Mm-hmm. And I strive to be a good daughter, and I try to excel to make them proud, right? And so it is sad that the discourse currently right now of our country of immigrants, it's taking away, right, the fact that we have families, that we have brothers and sisters and parents, and we want to grow, our own families. And with talking about this really ugly term that a friend of mine was saying, why do they use terms that are like metal, chain migration, anchor baby, I think that's such a good point. But, when they talk about that, in essence, they are talking and they're saying, look, we don't want anything else about you. We don't want your language. We don't want your culture. And now we don't want your families. We just want you to come and serve us, do the work that we need you to do, and be satisfied with the fact that you do that.
And I feel like, kind of going back to the walk you did from Miami to D.C., and then also tying it to the election in 2016, my sense is that Americans at their core, people who've been here for generations, they want their kids to do better than them. And I think that we have this opportunity to explain that so does an immigrant. They want their kids to do better than them.
Yeah, and I think the other point that's really important is that I'm not competing against you.
Yeah.
And because I do well doesn't mean that your son or daughter is going to do bad, right? And I think that that's the fear. A couple of years ago, I was speaking at the Cato Institute about immigration. And we did this whole panel, Gorvin Norquist and an immigration attorney, and Ruben Navarrete was actually the moderator. And when the questions portion of the presentation came about, the first question that was asked was by this white older man saying, well, I just want to know what's so wrong with not wanting so many brown little children and wanting more white children, right? And of course I was just like, oh my gosh, like this man just really like say what he just said. And everyone in the audience just looking at each other like, whoa.
And you're like, so how do you really feel?
Well, I don't know who the listeners are and how PG this can get. But my answer, I decided, I said, I can call this man out, or I can just use some comedy to like really show how ridiculous, right? Like the question he's asking. And I said, look, if you have so much problem, with not having brown babies, all you need to do is tell, more white people, to have more sex. That's the issue here.
On that note.
But reality is that's the fear, right? Is that white children or white faces or white people are going to be eliminated or, dismissed, and the fact that we talk about the majority and the fact that we talk about, we're growing in numbers and diversity, like that has exacerbated the fear that white Americans that do not know immigrants, that live in places where there's no immigrants and their country, and this is where, going back to your point, the cultural piece has been so critical, and we've lagged behind it because we've gotten so stuck in this right and wrong and this policy debate, and combating back these policies that at the end of the day we haven't stopped to understand where they're coming from, and why Trump, when he says make America great again, right, what it really means, and what it means is let's make America white again. And I'm also not trying to say that that is okay, right? But what I'm trying to say is that by us using certain like terms and going at this as just like you're a white supremacist, like it just doesn't help the debate, right? At the end of the day, it
doesn't mean, like I said, it doesn't meet people where they are. If anything, it pushes people further away.
Yeah. The way I've been able to describe this is it's like putting somebody in an unknown location in the dark and telling them, go ahead, walk in there. That's how white people feel about us, right? It's a dark room and they don't know where they're at, and not until their eyes adjust to the lighting, they're not going to walk anywhere. They're not going to move forward. And so we need to adjust the lighting for them, quote unquote, show them the light. And the thing is that we've been here before, but how did it become so cool to be Italian in the United States, right? The Jersey Shore,
Right.
It was a cultural shift, right? And maybe it was pizza and pasta that won them over. So I have hope. Have lots of hope for avocados, because I feel like avocados are doing a really good job in showing how awesome having other cultures can be. But at the heart of it, right, is when we talk about diversity, when we talk about the changing country, it just scares the bejesus out of people.
All right, so last question, because I feel like we get to sit here and talk for 2 hours, but both of us, ostensibly have some work to do today. So last question is, the name of this podcast is Only in America. So what I have been asking people is that, last question is to complete this phrase, only in America, ...
Only in America. Do we want to share what America is for the rest of the world, but not for the world that lives in America.
That's a great way to end this. Thank you for visiting. I haven't seen you forever, so
yes.
It's always really good to see you. Thank you.
You got it.
Gaby Pacheco is an immigrant rights leader from Florida. Find out more about Gaby's work and her life story at our website, immigrationforum.org, where you can also subscribe to our weekly podcast. That's it for now. Only in America is produced by the staff of the National Immigration Forum, with special thanks to producers Emily Chow and Megan Wetmore, and executive producer Kathleen Farrell. I'm Ali Nirani. Talk to you next week.